are starting with our Mr. Drain model MD10A, and more specifically, here are 5 of the more typical or more common installation techniques at the inlet port of the Mr. Drain. Beginning at the left, this is our special custom molded compression fitting, 1/2-inch barb inside the Mr. Drain, and it accommodates 1/2-inch ID 5/8 OD poly tubing, which is a very popular drain line. Here we see another one of our custom molded fittings, 1/2-inch slip by 5/8 ID barb for another common size of drain line used by many of the water softener dealers, 5/8 ID. Here we see very popular and common 1/2-inch PVC fittings. This could be an elbow, or preferably for a little better flow and a quieter flow, straight in coupling would be generally better than the elbow. Here again is simply just another, this is a slip coupling, 1/2-inch slip, which glues over the outside of the Mr. Drain port. Again, this end terminating onto the 5/8 OD 1/2-inch ID poly tubing. Here's another possibility that some dealers use. This is 1/2-inch barb, and again, it's designed to shove down inside the inlet port of the Mr. Drain. There's very little pressure and tendency to leak at the inlet ports. Glue the items is a good suggestion if they're slip over fittings. Barb fitting works fine also, and by the way, if it's shoved in and a little PVC or multi-purpose glue is simply just flowed around the neck of the Mr. Drain port here, it will ensure a better connection and no upward or backward movement once the installation is made. Finally, here we're looking at a very simple and perhaps the cheapest installation. Some of the dealers simply just take the 1/2-inch ID 5/8 OD poly tubing, cut it square at the end, and simply just shove it fully down into the neck of the Mr. Drain. Keep in mind there's not a lot of pressure at the inlet connection of these fittings, so there's no great tendency at all to leak. And in every case, you must always have clamped the inlet tubing anyway. A minimum of 2 clamps we recommend upstream of the air gap unit, regardless of the type of piping or tubing that's used coming in. Here's some typical installations of our Mr. Drain part and how they might look, beginning with the 2-inch standpipes over here on the left, and the 1.5-inch standpipe, metal, 1.5-inch plastic. Again, you can see the room if it's a rubber washer hose or a metal hook that goes in the end of a rubber washer hose in case the washer hose is too thick. If one were to look from down inside the standpipe looking back upward, this is the views that would be typical on a 2-inch standpipe and on a 1.5-inch standpipe when our Mr. Drain is mounted on the standpipe. Here we're looking at our Mr. Drain unit, and typically one of the ways it's connected at the inlet, of course, is there's commercial barb fittings. We don't mold this, and they do vary a little bit in size. And normally we've tried to design it so they push in a little bit snug, and usually that's all that's required, and then the piping is clamped up here to secure it. If you happen to get a brand of fitting that's a little bit larger and wants to swell the part a little bit or stress the inlet, then there's a simple way to stiffen it up, and that's simply to buy a 1/2-inch PVC fitting and simpler slip fitting, and just cut a little bit off of the fitting. Simply just glue it over the neck of the part, and that would strengthen it. Another way that's even better is just take some emery paper and rub the elbow back and forth a few times and clear it off. Sneak up on it though, because again, we don't want to have to overly force it in, but we don't want a real loose fit there either. As many of you probably know, the hose barb type fittings, which we're looking at here, this one being a barb by barb elbow, this one being a 1/2-inch pipe thread by barb elbow, or sold by us and many other people, and they're designed primarily for semi-flexible tubing such as this poly tubing that you see here. where the accuracy and the diameter doesn't have to be held super tight on the molded elbows themselves. Depending on the manufacturer and the molding run and so on, sometimes that may result in a little bit of tightness as the barb elbows need to be shoved down into the neck of the Mr. Drain part. One good, easy, cheap way to strengthen it is just as we see here. Take a standard half-inch fitting that you buy for 10 or 20 cents. Take a hacksaw and cut off a band of it and clean it up of debris and shavings and simply glue it down over the port of the Mr. Drain and let it give it time to dry, to set up. Then that greatly strengthens the port if the elbows are a little tight. An even better way, of course, is to take a little piece of sandpaper and just give it a few rotations in your hand, simply just like this. And it's not going to take more than maybe 5 or 10 rotations. Again, it depends on the coarseness and so on of the sandpaper. And you easily can knock off 10 or 15, 20 thousandths on the diameter. And so if you've got a little tightness, remember, you want to sneak up on it because you want it snug when you push it in there. You just don't want to be fighting it or having it so tight that you are driving it in, because that certainly would probably split the port of the Mr. Drain unit or any other similar half-inch PVC pipe. Here again, now we're back over, we're seeing our Mr. Drain model MD10A, typically installed on a 1.5-inch standpipe. In this case, we're showing a new feature also, that if there's nothing else to shear the standpipe, then the Mr. Drain, of course, can be centered and installed right on top of the standpipe, and the piping upstream then simply just gets clamped to hold it in place. Here we see on the right our regular Mr. Drain air gap unit with, in this particular case, one of our molded compression fittings that accommodates half-inch ID 5/8 OD poly tubing. You can see here that we've just illustrated that we have units that will fit on a 2-inch and a 1.5-inch standpipe, and that's regardless of whether they're plastic or the usual older galvanized steel standpipes. Here you see the effects of a bad connection at the inlet. It's been way overdriven, and with the wrong style of elbow, so you can see the leakage out the Mr. Drain. But now you see everything is fine again. You reduce the flow to 6 gallons a minute, even with this style of inlet tubing and inlet elbow, the Barb type elbow. It has no problem functioning with a reasonable amount of flow, and the Barb style insert. You notice in the last scene that the Mr. Green part was laboring just a little bit at that extremely high flow rate. However, take a look again now when you have it set up at 6 gallons a minute. There's absolutely no problem. Now we're taking a look at just the nozzle itself, the inlet nozzle for the Mr. Drain air gap, and the flow is set at 6 gallons a minute.